Before the skyscrapers pierced the clouds and the roar of the stock exchange defined a nation, America was a raw, unfolding experiment. To understand the global power it would become, we must first walk the grimy, gaslit streets of its infancy. This isn't the history of presidents and generals. It's the story of survival etched into the faces of those who built the foundation. In the late 19th century, the contrast between survival and luxury was stark. In 1888, the alleys of the Lower East Side served as bedrooms for homeless children. Their exhausted bodies slumped against filthy stoops after days spent scavenging. Just a few years later, in a cramped tenement basement, a mother named Lucy and her 3 young children, the oldest, just 9, worked by dim light, picking nuts for pennies to stave off starvation. These weren't abstract statistics. They were the human cost of a city hurtling toward the future. Yet, amidst this squalor, the seed of a national ethos was being planted. Inside the Mott Street Industrial School in 1889, a classroom of immigrant children, their clothes tattered but their backs straight, recited an oath together. They were learning the language, the customs, and the promise of their adopted land. This poignant ritual in a modest room was the first utterance of what would later be mythologized as the American dream. These children were the vanguard of a wave that would reshape the nation, their futures uncertain, but their hopes pinned on a new identity. But what happened when these hopes collided with the brutal realities of the streets they called home? If the tenements were the lungs of the old city, the streets were its beating heart, chaotic, vibrant, and utterly unforgiving. Here, commerce wasn't conducted in boardrooms, but from pushcarts and human backs. In 1896, a sponge vendor turned himself into a walking storefront, draped entirely in his wares, navigating the crowds of Manhattan. A few years later on 6th Avenue, a pretzel vendor paused to look into the camera, his face a roadmap of hard labor, his wooden tray holding the city's favorite snack. The neighborhood streets were intimate stages for daily life. On Mulberry Street, the heart of Little Italy, push carts overflowed with fresh produce and traditional foods as immigrants created a taste of home in the New World. At a corner on Mulberry Bend in 1900, men gathered around a pushcart for fresh clams, the vendors serving them on the spot in a ritual that reinforced community bonds. These were the original fast food social networks. But nature often reminded these bustling communities of their fragility. During a scorching heat wave in 1900, lines formed not for luxury goods, but for free ice-precious blocks that were the difference between life and death before modern refrigeration. Conversely, the blizzard of 1899 transformed the bustling city into a silent, ghostly expanse, where pedestrians trudged through heavy snow like specters in a frozen dreamscape. The city that never slept could be brought to a standstill by the whims of the weather. As the new century dawned, this chaotic human-scale city was about to be transformed by iron and steel, reaching for the sky in ways never before imagined. As the new century progressed, the city's ambitions grew skyward. The ground-level chaos of pushcarts began to compete with the shadow of infrastructure that would redefine urban living. In 1907, Delancey Street was a river of humanity, a steady stream of pedestrians, horse-drawn carriages, and early vehicles flowing toward the magnificent, newly completed Williamsburg Bridge. This wasn't just a crossing, it was a gateway, expanding the borders of the city and showcasing its growing might. This clash of old and new was perfectly illustrated on Brooklyn's Flatbush Avenue in 1910. Here, a fascinating intersection played out daily. Leisurely pedestrians, traditional horse-drawn carriages, and modern electric streetcars all shared the same expansive roadway. It was a city in transition, caught between a genteel past and a mechanized future. Meanwhile, just a few blocks away on 5th Avenue, the elite strolled in elegant attire, embodying a refined society that seemed a world away from the clamor of the bridge traffic. But by 1908, even that prestigious avenue was quickening, the clip-clop of horses beginning to be replaced by the sputter of early motorized vehicles. Yet, for the working class, this new verticality meant something else. The construction of these towering structures relied on the labor of thousands, and the tenement districts only grew more crowded. The skyscrapers were monuments to capital, but they cast long shadows over the neighborhoods where the laborers lived. The city was building an empire of steel, but the human stories at its base were often left in the dark. How did the families living in those shadows find light and joy amidst the relentless march of progress? Even in a city defined by relentless work, the pursuit of happiness found its outlets. For the masses, the great escape wasn't a vacation home in the countryside. It was a train ride to the sand and surf of Coney Island. By 1904, the beaches were packed with thousands. The men and women in their modest, heavy swimwear splashing joyfully in the Atlantic. They sought relief from the exhaustion of tenement life, the cool ocean breeze a temporary balm for their weary souls. Luna Park, with its fantastical architecture and electric lights, offered a glimpse into a dazzling future. In 1901, even beauty pageants drew crowds. As redheads lined up shyly in the era's conservative swimwear to showcase their unique charm. For the children of the crowded city, play was a precious commodity. With ground-level space scarce, rooftops became private heavens, where girls played with dolls amidst lines of drying laundry in 1919. In Central Park, unique goat-drawn carriages delighted young passengers in 1904, winding along scenic paths far from the dangerous streets. Public playgrounds, like Hamilton Fish Park in 1909, offered supervised joy, a rare luxury for kids growing up in cramped urban spaces. Even the winter brought magic. At the 1909 Carnival in Upper Saranac, young girls pulled sleds filled with dolls in a charming parade celebrating the snowy season. These moments of respite were vital, painting a picture of a society that, despite its hardships, knew how to savor joy. But as the decades turned, this world of simple pleasures would be eclipsed by a new era of celebrity. Glamour and global conflict, transforming American culture into something entirely different. The gritty, black and white world of the early 20th century gradually gave way to the sleek, anxious, and dazzling mid-century. By the 1960s, New York was not just a national hub but a global stage, and its players were becoming legends. In October 1963, President Kennedy's family made a striking appearance in the city. Their glamour and poise captivating the media just weeks before, a tragic turning point would shatter the nation's innocence. This was the era of the celebrity. Marilyn Monroe, even after undergoing surgery in 1961, was photographed leaving the hospital, her enduring charm and mystique undiminished. Audrey Hepburn radiated elegance during an interview at the Plaza Hotel the same year, her timeless grace personifying the city's sophisticated allure. And Frank Sinatra, dapper and confident during a film shoot in Central Park in 1962, reminded the world that his voice was the very definition of American cool. But this sophisticated veneer was about to be rocked by a cultural earthquake. In 1964, the Beatles arrived in America, greeted at the airport by a frenzy of thousands of screaming fans, as the British invasion had begun transforming popular culture forever. Hot on their heels came the Rolling Stones, their rebellious energy electrifying the city's stages. This new wave of talent, alongside established icons, created a cultural crucible. Yet beneath the surface of this glamorous, music-filled bubble, social and political tensions were simmering, ready to boil over onto the very streets where these fans danced. The 1960s were a time of looking forward, a fascination with the future that manifested in the city's architecture and art. In 1962, the 58-story Pan Am building rose above Grand Central Terminal, its massive scale dramatically altering the Midtown skyline and symbolizing corporate ambition. A breathtaking aerial view of the 1964 World's Fair in Queens showed a utopian metropolis of the future, attracting millions to witness the promise of technology. At the fair, people relaxed under giant grass umbrellas, immersed in the excitement of discovering new things. This future was also being built by unseen hands. In 1964, a staggering 3,000 construction workers filled the windows of the nearly completed Chase Manhattan Bank building. A powerful image of collective labor on a monumental scale. Just a few years earlier, a lone window cleaner at Rockefeller Center performed his dizzying duties high above the ground, an unsung hero maintaining the gleam of the grand structures. Even art reflected this new, strange world. In 1960, a giant eye was unexpectedly projected onto skyscrapers, turning cold concrete into a surreal canvas and amazing the citizens below. Yet even in this futuristic landscape, the old struggles persisted. In Brooklyn, a man named Ronald Hazel, worked passionately on a robot he built himself, capturing the era's DIY spirit. But down on the streets, a giant trash basket in Times Square urged public cleanliness, highlighting the age-old battle against grime in an increasingly crowded city. The gleaming towers and futuristic fairs were one reality, but just below, the city grappled with the timeless issues of labor, poverty, and social order. What happened when the search for a perfect future clashed with the harsh realities of the present? The shiny veneer of the 1960s masked deep social fissures that were about to split the city open. The era of love and peace was also an era of protest and instability. In 1961, a young couple enjoyed a sense of freedom among 10,000 youth at a Central Park event that showcased new generational ideals of harmony. But this idyllic picture was sharply contrasted by the sight of police aggressively pursuing street gang members after violent altercations, revealing the security challenges simmering in certain districts. The fight for dignity and equality was reaching a boiling point. In 1964, powerful protests erupted following the killing of 15-year-old James Powell. Angry crowds took to the streets, transforming the city into a dramatic stage for social upheaval. This was not the polished world of the Plaza Hotel. This was raw, urgent, and demanding to be heard. Even international tensions spilled onto the streets, with a giant poster criticizing Khrushchev regarding the Berlin crisis placed opposite the United Nations building in 1961. Stark reminder that the Cold War was being fought with propaganda as much as politics. Amidst this turmoil, simple moments of humanity persisted. Elderly homeless men waited quietly outside the Bowery Mission, their weathered faces bearing the marks of time and struggle. Children gazed longingly through a bakery window at pastries they could only dream of. The image of America in the early 60s was not singular. It was a complex tapestry of hope, fear, progress, and profound injustice. To see the full picture of the nation, we must look beyond the city that never sleeps to the rural heartlands, where a different, quieter struggle defined the American experience. While New York transformed into a vertical empire, the soul of America still resided in its vast rural heartlands. Here, the struggle wasn't against the pace of the city, but against the raw power of nature and the unforgiving demands of the land. In the Texas mountains in 1900, this farmer and his two young daughters faced a life where immense resilience was required from every family member just to survive. They were the backbone of a nation. Their solemn expressions, captured in a 1916 photograph from rural Kentucky, representing the typical families who worked the land. Life was harsh, especially for the children. In 1909, Catherine Young's 9 children posed together in North Carolina. To survive their rural poverty, both the mother and the older children worked exhausting shifts at the local cotton mill. This was the hidden cost of progress, a reality often obscured by the era's significant economic growth. Yet, in the midst of this hardship, there was dignity. The Witter family rested on the porch of their Arkansas log cabin in 1913, cherishing precious moments of family connection after long days of field work. A family in rural Virginia lived in harmony with nature, valuing the fruits of their own hard labor. For these families, owning land was the ultimate symbol of the American dream. They were the enduring foundation upon which the America we know today was built. But as the industrial age marched on, could this way of life survive the pull of the cities and the promise of a new, mechanized world? The farm families who left the land did so reluctantly, driven by forces beyond their control. Mechanization meant fewer hands were needed to produce food, while falling crop prices and rising debt made traditional farming unsustainable. A 1915 photograph shows an Iowa family posing beside their farmhouse one last time before auctioning their belongings and heading west. The father's hands, calloused from decades of plowing, gripped the porch rail as if reluctant to let go. The mother's eyes avoid the camera, fixed instead on the garden she planted each spring, now overgrown with weeds. The children stand uncertainly, too young to understand fully, but old enough to sense their parents' grief. They would join thousands of others on the road to California, seeking work as migrant laborers or in the factories springing up along the coast. Their story repeated millions of times across America, the painful uprooting from ancestral land, the uncertain journey toward an unknown future. The adjustment was jarring, learning new languages, navigating unfamiliar customs, adapting to indoor work after generations of outdoor labor. Yet they came because the city offered something the countryside could not: the possibility of advancement through sheer determination. The factories that employed these newcomers demanded brutal sacrifices. In the steel mills of Pittsburgh, men worked 12-hour shifts in temperatures exceeding 100 degrees. Their bodies drenched in sweat, their lungs filling with smoke and particulate matter. A 1907 photograph shows steelworkers leaving the mill after a night shift. Their faces streaked with grime, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. They attended open hearth furnaces, rolled white-hot steel, and dodged molten metal, all for wages that barely covered rent and food. Accidents were routine: burns, crushed limbs, and deaths from falls or equipment failures. The companies provided no compensation, no safety regulations existed, and injured workers were simply replaced. The transportation revolution connected this expanding nation in ways previously unimaginable. The Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, reduced cross-country travel from months to days, enabling the movement of people and goods on an unprecedented scale. Photographs from the 1880s show immigrant workers, Chinese, Irish, Mexican, laying track across deserts and mountains, their labor made visible in the steel ribbons stretching toward the horizon. They faced dynamite accidents, hostile weather, and attacks from displaced native peoples. Yet they continued because the work, however dangerous, paid better than anything available at home. Their descendants would spread across the West, their presence transforming the region's ethnic and cultural landscape. The automobile age dawned slowly, but accelerated rapidly. Early photographs from the 1900s show horseless carriages as curiosities, wealthy enthusiasts motoring through city parks, while pedestrians stopped to stare. By 1910, cars were becoming common sights, their sputtering engines and honking horns adding new sounds to the urban soundscape. The 1908 Ford Model T, priced affordably and produced efficiently, brought automobile ownership within reach of ordinary Americans. Photographs from the 1910s show farm families posing proudly beside their new Ford, the car representing freedom, mobility, and connection to a wider world. Dirt roads gradually gave way to paved highways, roadside businesses sprang up to serve travelers, and the American landscape began reshaping itself around the automobile's needs. The communications revolution paralleled transportation advances, shrinking the mental distance between Americans. The telegraph had already connected cities instantaneously, but the telephone brought voice-to-voice communication into homes and businesses. A 1915 photograph shows telephone operators at work in a Midwest exchange. Young women seated at switchboards, plugging and unplugging cables to connect callers. They worked long shifts, spoke courteously to rude customers, and maintained the complex network that enabled modern commerce and personal connection. Radio followed in the 1920s, bringing entertainment, news, and advertising into living rooms, creating shared cultural experiences that united Americans across regional divides. The education system expanded dramatically during this period, responding to the needs of an industrial economy requiring literate workers. Compulsory attendance laws, progressive-era reforms, and immigrant parents' determination to give children better lives filled classrooms across America. Photographs from the era show crowded urban classrooms with children of dozens of nationalities sitting together. American flags prominent, teachers maintaining order through strict discipline. These students learned English, civics, basic skills while absorbing the cultural values that would make them American. The process was often painful ridicule for accents, pressure to abandon ancestral traditions, conflicts between home culture and school expectations, but it produced generations of Americans who navigated between two worlds. the women's suffrage movement achieved its greatest victory during this transitional period, winning the right to vote with the 19th Amendment in 1920. Photographs of suffragists marching, picketing, being arrested show women who refused to accept second-class citizenship. They endured ridicule, violence, and imprisonment. Hunger strikes and force feedings, all for the principle that women deserve full participation in democratic life. Older photographs from the 1910s show women in traditional roles: domestic, maternal, subordinate, while later images capture women voting, running for office, and claiming public space as their own. This transformation, incomplete as it was, represented a fundamental shift in American social relations. As we survey this era of transition from farm to factory, from horse to car, from isolation to connection, we recognize that change always brings loss alongside gain. The rural communities that emptied out had sustained generations with their rhythms of planting and harvest, their intimate knowledge of place, their networks of mutual support. The industrial cities that absorbed these displaced people offered opportunity, but also anonymity, excitement, but also danger, diversity, but also conflict. Americans of this era lived through transformations as profound as any in history. Their experiences captured in photographs that allow us to witness their struggles and triumphs. How does your own family's story fit into this great transition? Share in the comments where your ancestors were during this pivotal period in American history.